Hi Nat5, so we're on Life on Earth and we're looking at food production, and in particular why we need to increase our food yield. So here's our problem. Human population is going up fast, okay, and more people means you need more food. So here's a kind of graph of what's going on, and this is our current estimate. If we are going to feed at a reasonable level the people who are on the planet by 2050, we need to double food production. Now that is a huge ask. The reason that we've got such a massive increase in population, we put down to two main big things. Agriculture. Actually working out how to grow food in a organised manner, and that would include obviously farming animals as well. And the other biggie, medicine. Okay, these have had a huge impact on the lifespan that we now have, the likelihood of surviving childbirth, your early years, and how old you get to. Okay, and all of this is impacting on our current population rate. So here's your big question: how do you get more food? So the first thing you could do, given that we've talked about energy transfers, is you could shorten the food chain. Now that means that you actually, it's not necessarily about getting more food, it's about getting more energy in an efficient manner. You could increase the food yield, so that means making your crops better, more efficient. So you pick the plant or animal that you're going to use, you go for like high yield things that will actually yield more. So yield is a measure of how much you're getting in a given area. You can breed plants and animals, so selective breeding, this kind of goes back to your multicellular carrier 4. And you could go down our kind of proper super sciencey level that we're now at, you could go for genetically modified crops, and that opens up a whole can of ethical issues as well. Intensive farming is very effective at increasing food yield, but there are lots of questions about how you apply that and how you look after the land. So we're looking at fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides. So why would you shorten the chain? So this is, as I say, the energy transfer stuff. So if you remember from the last topic, so it should be okay, right? So if you have, say, grain going to the chicken, 10% of that energy that was inside the grain actually gets to the chicken, and that means if we then eat the chicken, we're only getting 1% of the energy which was originally in the grain. But if we say, right, okay, instead of going to the chicken, we go straight to the human, 10% of it goes. So shortening that chain means that you've got less of this energy loss that you're getting every single level you go up. And there is a lot of logic to that, and there is a lot of science behind people not necessarily cutting out meat, but considering how much of it they eat to try and help with this. Right, so selective breeding you looked at in carrier 4 in multicellular. So what we're looking at here is basically generations and generations of animals or plants that we pick the parents that have what we want. Okay, and you can do lots with that, like an awful lot with that. You can change almost the whole structure of plants and animals over time. But you're limited to what's in the plant or the animal. You can't add in something new. You want to do that, you have to go down the genetic engineering level. And this is what you could do. You could actually use genetic engineering to increase yield. So you could actually change the organism's mechanism for producing food itself, or you can make it more resistant to damage by it making its own pesticides, herbicide, things like this. Here's a kind of list of things that you might be able to breed in, well, not breed in, engineer in using genetic modification. Okay, so intensive agriculture, intensive farming, is any of various types of agriculture that involve a higher level of input-output per unit of agricultural land area, so you're getting more out of a space. It is characterised by a low fallow ratio, so a short time when you're leaving the land to just sit. Okay, higher use of inputs such as capital and labour, and higher crop yields per unit land area. So that means that you might need to put a lot of money into it to get it started, and you might need to use a high intense amount of labour to get it started, but you'll get a higher yield. Okay, so you can think about this and consider if you take one type of farming, because it says various types, so if you could take like arable, what do you think this really means? And think about the machinery you would use, how you would set up the land, what you might do to it to make it work harder. Okay. So one of the people who really looked at how you could push kind of the limits of farming as it pretty much as it currently is, led to something called the Green Revolution, and the guy who was involved in this most was someone called Norman Borlaug. Okay, so what this was doing was saying if you take high yield varieties, modern farming methods, that's basically intensive versions, you use chemicals to help, that's fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, then you can increase food production. And this is Norman Borlaug, and he spent a huge amount of time working on this, and at conservative estimates, you know, he's saved the lives of millions and millions of people because he brought an increase in yield that wasn't there before to places where otherwise people would have starved. So one of the things you get with intensive farming is something called monoculture. So mono means one. So monoculture would mean growing one thing. So you grow a single crop in a given area, and those areas could be massive. Now that means it's easier because you know exactly what that one crop needs, so you're going to be able to use the same kind of fertilizer profile, same pesticides, you're going to use the same harvesting machinery. There's a lot of reasons why you go monoculture is an easy way to go. But there are some big questions about that. If you think about this in terms of biodiversity, then we have a bit of an issue. If you change the ecosystem so you only have one crop in there, then that's going to make a huge difference to all of the interconnections that you would normally have had. And if you look at these pictures, you can see quite often you go for vast areas, so you're not got any break in between them. And there is another issue that if you've only got one crop, there is a vulnerability there. So one thing, one disease that is dangerous to that particular crop could wipe out a huge quantity of area. So it has its pros and it has its cons. It's important to think about how they actually impact. Okay, I'll leave you with just this last kind of thinking. Here's a graph which is showing the human population in millions going up and the extinctions that we know of in green. Now these are very much correlated, meaning that they go in, you can see the pattern is very clear, so there's a correlation here. I would ask, do you think there is a causation? Is the human population driving the extinctions that we're finding? Okay, in a later presentation we will look at the hippo factors and we'll see if you can remember what's going on with those. And that's it.